And I'll turn it over to Amelia at this point to launch our conversation. So thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, and thank you for giving us this opportunity. Welcome, everyone. Really excited to have this conversation with three colleagues about just about everything you can think of that we could put into a 1-hour session. So we've already had our planning discussion, and I'm really certain that we're going to have a good discussion. So first things first, I'm kind of disappointed that I didn't see any student affairs respondents in the poll. And I say that only because I'm joining you from NASPA, which is a National Membership Association for Student Affairs Professionals. But I think that we're going to be able to bring a student affairs perspective to that too. So we have Jerry, Pam, and Jeff with us today. We're going to have a free-flowing conversation around 3 core themes, which I'll tell you about after I give each of them a chance to just say hello and give you an overview of their work. So let's start with Pam.
Okay, so you're wanting me to do the overview right now?
Sure, just
okay. All right. My name is Pam Bowers. I'm Associate Vice President. I'm a Student Affairs Representative. I'm Associate Vice President for Planning, Assessment, and Innovation, technically in the Division of Student Affairs and Academic Support at the University of South Carolina. And to tell you about our CLR, let me give you just a bit of context. So picture a traditional academic transcript that documents what students do academically. It's essentially a report of courses students take, degrees that they've earned. And the reader can then refer to the academic catalog of courses or to a course syllabus to learn more about the educational purpose and design of a degree program or of specific courses, to learn what faculty intend for students to know and be able to do as a result of taking this course or completing this degree, and how faculty engage them in learning activities in order to be able to help them achieve those intended learning outcomes. So student affairs professionals believe that students learn from engaging in the educationally purposeful programs, events, and activities that we provide for students. But information about the purpose and design of these activities and records of student participation in them have not traditionally been collected in an institution's information management system, so haven't been visible in the same ways or available for reporting in a transcript document or other report. So our CLR was born out of an interest in having greater visibility of the educational purpose and design of student affairs programs, and to improve our ability to provide better evidence of the educational impact of these programs. And we thought the way to make that happen was to improve institution level data about student engagement in student affairs programs, events, and activities, which we refer to as the co-curriculum. So we essentially created a new set of education records, official education records, recording student engagement and learning in educationally purposeful, but generally non-credit bearing learning experiences provided by the university. And I think when most people use the term CLR, they're thinking primarily of a transcript document that students can share with prospective employers. And some of the records that we're collecting centrally are records that students will want to share in a transcript document, but others are records of support kinds of activities. And these are probably not the kind of thing that a student wants to report to an employer, like supplemental instruction sessions, career development workshops, resource sessions like how to use the library, that kind of thing. But we include, excuse me, we include these in student records because we find that these records are helpful to the student for planning and reflection on their learning and progress, and helpful to the institution to understand each student's whole educational experience at the university. And we very intentionally use the word co-curriculum to describe what's recorded in the new education records, because they're not part of the required curriculum to earn a degree, but they are educationally purposeful, very intentionally designed and provided by the university. And they're not extracurricular, because although each student will do it differently, we do intend and expect that every student is going to engage with campus resources to make a successful transition into college, engage in career development and development of career management skills. We expect every student to get help when they need it, whether that help is academic kinds of help like tutoring, supplemental instruction, or help with physical, emotional well-being, other kinds of help. We want every student to explore new interests or pursue interests that they're passionate about. And we want all to engage in leadership and service, to learn to be a citizen, be a contributing part of the community. So benefits to the students and to institution and to our institution of recording student records in this way include that the process of defining and organizing information in this way about the purpose and design of the co-curriculum forces us to get clear and in agreement on what the purpose and design of those things should be. And it provides new institution level data that previously was available only in departments or units, each of which operated in its own way to define and organize information.
Mhm.
We're naming and defining the skills students develop, so that's part of the record. Our institutional researchers now have access to data on each student's engagement and learning beyond the classroom to add to their analyses of what works and for which students, for outcomes like persistence, timely graduation, post-graduation employment. And students and advisors have access to their records of engagement with the definitions, which informs advising session conversations on education and career planning, help students with reflection on their learning and be more intentional in choosing their engagements, future engagements. Students can share those records in an official transcript with prospective employers, grad schools, awards committees, whoever they want to share them with. And I'll add one thought. We started in student affairs, but expanded the scope of our CLR a few years ago when university leaders wanted to be sure we were engaging all students in high impact practices. And our institutional data didn't really provide a means to identify these practices. So we used Beyond the Classroom Matters, our CLR project, to document the purpose and design of both courses and non-credit bearing engagements to identify those that include those essential design elements of high impact practices. And so now have better data to analyze actual impacts and university offerings. So I will stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Pam. And that is a lot happening at the University of South Carolina. And I can say, I should have mentioned this earlier, that the University of South Carolina, which is where Pam is, as well as the University of Central Oklahoma with Jeff, and IUPUI with Jerry, were all campuses that were a part of a national effort that started 5 to 6 years ago to help campuses and work with them to develop these comprehensive learner records. So as evident by all that Pam has shared, there's a lot happening in this area. And I think we'll get into more of that after I give a chance to Jeff and Jerry to share a little bit about kind of what they've been up to, and then we're going to go straight into a conversation. So how about Jeff next? Maybe tell us a little bit more briefly about your work at UCO, and then we'll ask Jerry to follow next.
Absolutely. The work that we've done with the Comprehensive Learner Record here is termed our Student Transformative Learning Record, STLR, the acronym, so we just say Stellar whenever we talk about this. And in a nutshell, Stellar is the way that we track, assess, and document student development in beyond disciplinary areas. Some people may use the term essential skills, institutional learning outcomes, graduate attributes. They go by many names, but our areas, which we call our Central Six, include many of the things that all of you will be familiar with: leadership, service learning, civic engagement, research, creative, scholarly activities, and so on. And so in 2008, what our university had to do was take a look at all of the various student development activities that had popped up around campus of their own accord, might have been based out of a college, even an individual faculty member, or out of student affairs, things like peer health leaders, the American Democracy Project. There were about 22 of these things that had popped up all over campus. Administration said, is there an umbrella under which this can be conceptually organized? UCO realized immediately transformative learning was that organizer. And then Stellar became our operationalization of that development of students in those areas. And so what we call our stellar snapshot is the documentation. And these engagements happen in the classroom with what we term stellar tagged assignments. And they also happen outside of the classroom, where we have figured a way to use our learning management system as sort of the system of record for capturing all our stellar data. Easy to do when you're talking curricular, you're already in the course shell, but we also have a mechanism that automatically launches a so-called course pseudo shell for those outside of the course activities that students engage in. And then all of these activities come with a reflective artifact that is assessed. And that's what shows up on the student's transcript, and which provides the student the opportunity to see the arc of her own development across her undergraduate career here, for instance.
So Jeff, I have to say the same thing that I said with Pam. It's hard to capture in just a couple minutes all that you've been working on. So Jerry, I think last opportunity for you. Just tell us a little bit more about what you do at IUPUI.
Sure. Thanks, Amelia. So a lot of the stuff we're doing overlaps with what Pam and Jeff already talked about. Our comprehensive learner record is called the Experiential and Applied Learning Record. We're trying to move away from acronyms at IUPUI, and basically we just call it the record. And it's a way of capturing student engagement in co-curricular and curricular experiences. It was initially created to capture the co-curricular space. IUPUI for a long time had those RISE tag courses where you could tag a course in the SIS as a research experience, international, service learning, or experiential. And we're moving everything over to the record. And students can get we don't call it a transcript, but it's like a document that shows their engagement in these curricular and co-curricular experiences. In order to get on the record, we have a committee here on campus. It's part of our program review and assessment committee, and they review all applications to be included on the record. These could be faculty applications for a curricular experience, or student affairs for a co-curricular experience, program directors from across campus. They have to show alignment to our institutional learning outcomes. They have to show reflection is taking place in the experience, and they need to show that there is an assessment plan and provide a rubric showing how they're going to evaluate students aligned to those learning outcomes, which again are aligned to our institutional learning outcomes. Once the experience is approved by the committee, the individual who applied owns the experience. They are responsible for entering students into the SIS, and only those students who have completed the experience. And that applies for curricular and co-curricular experiences. This ensures fidelity, that students are getting this designation if they truly did complete the experience. And I'll leave it there for right now, and we can dive into some more specifics as we go through the rest of the session today.
All right. Well, this is that time. So I can tell you that if you're joining the call and you're at one phase that involves just having the discussion, like maybe your campus is thinking about creating a comprehensive learner record, and you came to the session because you wanted to see what are the biggest takeaways that you should go back and talk with colleagues about, like the very first set of steps. Or maybe you're in the middle of it right now. You're saying you've reached a couple bumps in the road, not quite sure what type of pivot you should make, or maybe you actually have an established record and you're looking to make it better. I think that there are three themes among many that most of you will probably run into at some point. The first is capturing students' learning, knowing that these are comprehensive learner records and that the student should be able to take this record and show it to a potential employer or graduate school or peers or anyone and be able to tell them what they know and what they can do wherever that learning happened. So capturing student learning is an important one. Think of these as the 3 C's. So that's the first one, capturing, that's the C, student learning. The second one being collaboration. So I think you probably have already sensed from Pam and Jeff and Jerry already that this is not something that a campus could do in just one single division. So lots of partnership happening between academic affairs, student affairs, IR, the registrar, of course, and many others, communications department. So collaboration is a big part of that. And the third is communication. And so all different types of discussions, be it branding, the naming of it, should it be an acronym, should it not, should it be visible in print as well as digital, things like that. There's a lot that we could cover. So we're going to start with these 3 themes, and imagine if we were traveling pre-pandemic days, we'd be taking off. And so imagine if you're taking off now, we're trying to reach our 10,000 feet. And we're going to start in the area of capturing students' learning. But actually, I see a question here from Suzanne. Let's squeeze this in real quick. So it says, do any of your processes enable student self-submission with an ability to get these validated by an advisor or program director? So let's see if maybe Jerry, if you have a quick answer to that.
No, what typically happens is students will approach us or so I work in the Institute for Engaged Learning. We're kind of the stewards of this record here at IUPUI. And students will come to us saying, well, I did this experience, but I don't see it on the record. And so we'll have to go back to the program director or the faculty member saying, would you consider getting your experience on the record? So students are becoming advocates for us and getting more experiences on the record, but a student can't sort of self-submit their experience for inclusion. It really has to be driven by the program director, faculty member, professional staff member.
Mm-hmm. Let's add, Jeff, I was gonna say, Jeff and Pam, I want to give you a chance to answer too. What would you say, Jeff?
Yeah, just real quickly, short answer to the question is yes. We call it our student individual reflection assignment. And we thought it was very important for students who might have, for example, developed some leadership skills at an activity with another group outside of UCO completely. And so we do have a process for students to approach us, sit down with someone one-on-one, investigate that, write the reflective artifact or create it in whatever manner, the same as for all of our engagements. And that can then be added to their official Stellar Snapshot because it's been vetted by the university.
Mm-hmm. Pam, what would you add?
Our answer would be no. Students can't self-report anything in the way we kind of describe, or the way the question was asked. Our records are all about the ways that our university, our educators intentionally engage students and the results they are intending to produce. So if a student is engaged in something that the university is providing that they feel like is a learning opportunity for them that they would like to have recorded, what we suggest that they do is speak to the faculty or staff member about getting that into our system, and we will reach out to them as well. But we students can't self-report and work backwards the way we have ours set up.
Yeah, great question, Suzanne. I had to squeeze it in. Also want to make note that in the chat, we have the links to each of the programs. So if you have a chance to maybe take those and save them in a bookmark, you can read more. And thank you, Kelly, for helping us manage the chat questions. So in this first bucket of capturing students' learning, Pam, I want to come to you with the first question. And over the years in visiting USC, you've told us several times that the work to create the Beyond the Classroom Matters project wasn't exclusively just to end with the record, but instead to learn more about your data and to do some meaningful and timely assessment. So I imagine that over the years, looking at lots and lots of student engagement data, you've started to see some trends. Are there any particular interesting data points that you could share about students' engagement in co-curricular activities?
Yeah, thank you for asking. We really do think of our project as a data project. And one thing I would say about that is the importance of the data to us, and Jerry kind of got at this, is we want our data, our information about a purposeful engagement, we call them, to be accurate so that the data point representing that activity has integrity. We know that what was described is what really happened for the student. And so we have been collecting enough data, enough records over the years that our institutional research folks are being able to do some initial analyses and excited about doing more. But they have been able to identify a positive relationship between freshman student engagement in co-curricular activities and their return for the sophomore year. And in a separate analysis, they took a look at junior and senior engagement in practices that we had identified as having the characteristics of high impact practices, and found a positive connection to success the following year, with success being defined as either the student returned for their senior year or they graduated in that interim period. So they're working now to deepen those analyses by looking at how those relationships might vary for different student populations, and by having the data about the design of programs as well as the yes or no, did a student do a thing, that can help us figure out, what works and for which students, what kinds of engagements might be more effective for first generation students, for example.
Yeah. Pam, that's awesome. And I know that at some point, probably in any campus effort, someone's going to say, did it work? Did it achieve the outcome for which you hoped it would when you designed it? And so I hear a couple things in your response. One, obviously, is that thinking early with some key data questions you want to ask. And two, using that data to promote the things we already know from scores of historical studies that show that the more engaged student is the one that's more likely to persist. But I think your approach to it and involving IR helps make that more concrete. So just congrats, on that. Jeff, I want to ask a follow-up question to Pam's points here, to Pam's points about how it affects students at different levels of their involvement on the campus. I want to pivot a little bit and think about the students who probably want to be engaged, but maybe given their attendance status, maybe they're coming part-time, or maybe they're not living on campus. How has UCO approached the delivery of these types of opportunities for every student, especially those who may not have as much time to offer, but have some, but have to manage that with other competing priorities? How has UCO managed that?
Yeah, well, it's a great question for us because we're the kind of an institution where over 80% of our students are commuter students. And so we were very intentional from the get-go in designing Stellar to think about the engagement opportunities for commuter students who, as you all know, typically don't have the time on campus that students that live in dorms do. So that's one reason why we were so intentional about the Stellar engagements, including in-class activities and assignments. And what we call Stellar tagged assignments are existing assignments that faculty may have been using for 10 years, who knows, but there are ways to associate those assignments to one or more of our tenant areas. And so that means that even for commuter students who may never attend a single co-curricular event, hard to imagine, but let's hypothetically say that could happen, that student is still going to be engaged with critical reflection about leadership development, for example, or global and cultural competencies. We capture it, assess it. It's part of the, becomes part of the official record, evidence-based, in other words. Then also, Stellar works beautifully in the virtual environment. And so many of these kinds of students are able to engage in virtual activities. We have lots of Stellar virtual tagged activities that work beautifully. Once again, everything evidence-based, so the students do submit their reflections. The one exception to this I must mention is if there is an event where all we know will happen is the students are exposed to that tenant area, then students can swipe into that event with their ID card and they are automatically assigned merely exposure because we know it happened at that level of engagement, but it did not potentially go higher than that unless they produce or provide a reflective artifact, and we have mechanisms for it. And the last two things I'll say is we have what we call Stellar locations all over campus. A commuter student who visits the Career Development Center, for example, in her senior year, that is a Stellar location because when she goes there, there is a card swipe unit right there at the front desk. We know that when she visits that unit, she is engaging, even if it's only at the exposure level, in one or more of our tenants. And then the final thing is Stellar tagged activities work in the online environment, even, as you know well, Amelia, for experiential learning. And so we're very happy to have found very good receptivity to Stellar tagged assignments in online classes.
Yeah, that's great, Jeff. I think it's going to come up more often now. I think especially as some students have figured out that not being physically in person is not a reason for them to not be engaged. And so, Jerry, I want to come to you with a bit of a similar question. This could be part capturing students' learning, but maybe a little bit of a teaser to collaboration. So a lot of what we've heard about these comprehensive learner records is that there should be some alignment between what students are learning in the classroom and what they're learning outside the classroom. Some of that relates to learning outcomes, but some of it also relates to just selecting the areas of focus and partnering student affairs and academic affairs. So what advice do you have for faculty? I think we had a small percentage of attendees here from academic affairs. What advice would you give about how to select those areas of focus or even the learning outcomes for which you're going to be using these records?
Yeah, I think we're kind of in I don't know how unique we are. Maybe 20 years ago, we were unique at IUPUI. We have some, common institutional learning outcomes for students. And basically we call them the profiles of learning for undergraduate success, or just the profiles. And basically they articulate that we want all of our current students and graduates to be able to communicate, innovate, problem solve, and be community contributors. So to get an experience on the record, you need to show alignment to one of those profiles of learning for undergraduate success. The application process for student affairs experiences or curricular experiences is the exact same thing. It's the same application, it's the same alignment. The subcommittee that we have, which is part of our program review assessment committee for across the campus, has student affairs folks on it. It has faculty on it. It has administrators on it like me. And so trying to basically say that these are equivalent, like if a student does an experience in student affairs that gets a leadership tag on our record, and then the School of Business may have an experience on the record that also gets a leadership tag, those are weighted the same on our experiential record. It's not different. And so going through the same process, having a committee that's representative of all the different constituent groups on campus, I think is important. In recognizing and really promoting the fact that if a student does a co-curricular experience or a curricular experience that is on the record, it gets the same weighting, if you will. When the student prints off the record, they can see that these experiences are there, the number of hours that were allocated to the experience, if we're tracking hours for a specific experience. And we just have some really great student affairs folks here at IUPUI that have really gravitated to the record. The students are doing some great work in student affairs programming. And so they've been real intentional about getting their experiences on the record. And then students go and talk about it, promote it, and it just becomes a, sort of like a self-fulfilling prophecy, if you will, in increasing and feeding that co-curricular programming on our campus.
Got it. I want to squeeze in one more quick question for you, Jerry. Julie Brandt's asking if your application is available on the website.
Yeah, on the link that Kelly posted, there's this application should be there. I can go look and post a direct link for you. It's a Microsoft Word document right now. We're migrating it to Qualtrics, but I'm happy to show it to you. The one small caveat is to help increase curricular experiences on the record. We did experiment over the past year and a half during COVID. Faculty could fill out a one-page application and attach their syllabus. We thought there'd be enough information on the syllabus where we could get a sense of the questions that are listed on the longer application. That hasn't really worked out like we hoped it would. So we're really right now, we're sort of back to anyone who wants to be on the record is filling out the entire application. But let me see if I can find it. I can post it in the link. I post a link in the chat.
Sure. Okay, so before we get to our second theme, I do want to circle back with maybe one kind of wrap-up question. Hopefully Pam and Jeff, you both can talk about this, and Jerry too, if you have something to add. It's related to accreditation. I think that when we talk about capturing students' learning, it oftentimes happens with internal discussions, academic affairs, student affairs, and others. And at some point, somebody will say, what do the accreditors require? What can we show them? Pam, maybe start with you and share a little bit, if you can, about how the process of your work has connected to accreditation requirements and how you all been navigating that.
Okay, thanks.
Sure.
Very timely question for us. We just went through our reaffirmation of accreditation with SACS, the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools Commission on Colleges. Just finished that this calendar year. And our Beyond the Classroom Matters, that's what we call our system that produces our CLR. We used a lot of information from that to respond to a couple of the standards that are relevant for student support services. We use that information to demonstrate how the university provides appropriate student support services. And we used a lot of our Beyond the Classroom Matters information to provide evidence of meeting the standard for continuous improvement to achieve the intended outcomes of individual student support services, if that makes sense. So we were able to show, the numbers and characteristics of students who engage in our programs, how those are distributed across the university, how, first generation Pell eligible, different categories of students are engaged in various ways. And in the SACS region, the southern region, all colleges and universities are required to have a quality enhancement plan, which is a plan to improve and advance undergraduate education. So our new quality enhancement plan, which is actually a continuation of a previous plan 10 years ago that was also based on this idea, but now we're kind of taking it a step further. But it's very much related to this because it is the goal of this plan is to be sure that all students are engaged in educationally purposeful co-curricular programs, events, and activities. And in particular, we're going to focus on equity of opportunity and outcomes of various student populations in co-curricular engagement, along with academic engagement.
Got it. Jeff, would you add anything about accreditors?
Yeah, just a couple quick thoughts. And one of them is this kind of comprehensive learner record can be absolutely invaluable in terms of helping an institution prove that it is meeting its mission. And so lots of universities will say, yes, we're preparing leaders for the 21st century, and you all know how those kinds of things are couched in mission statements. Well, do you have the data? Can you prove it? How are you tracking it? And I can tell you that in our institutional reaccreditation mid-cycle review a couple years ago, Stellar was mentioned over 200 times because we have the data points to show this is the impact of engaging with this activity in terms of improved retention, improved STEM retention for underrepresented first-generation low-income students. And so it's not just at the institutional level, but also at the programmatic level. So ABET, AASCB, all of those programmatic accreditors, when we know a college or a program has one of those visits coming up, we start getting ready to provide lots and lots of stellar data because they always ask.
Mm-hmm. Jerry, just to round it out, anything you would add about accreditors?
Yeah, I think, so we have a Tableau report that pulls data from our record on the back end so that you can see, students by achievement category, by which student learning outcome out of those 4 profiles. It pulls some demographic characteristics by student as well. But I think most importantly, like we're going through our reaffirmation, we're writing the document now, it'll get submitted. We have our visit with the Higher Learning Commission next year. And the record is, I wouldn't say it's a central piece of it, but it's a piece of it because it really, the process in which we have to get experiences on the record. And then once they're there for students to get the achievement category involves assessment. It involves these learning outcomes and assessing the learning, using a rubric. And that kind of process is something the accreditors like to see because you're gathering evidence and you're closing the loop. Trying to improve what it is that you're doing, whether it's the co-curricular or curricular experiences.
Absolutely. So I've been watching the chat and I see we have a couple more questions. I'm going to save some of time at the end so that we can squeeze in 2. I see one really good one came in about prior learning assessment, and another one also, I hope I don't mispronounce your name, Swati. So I made a note of that one. We're going to save those for a little bit later. So if we're on the plane and we took off, I think we're now at our kind of cruising altitude. So the bigger part of the discussion around capturing students' learning, wanted to start there because the learning record itself should show and provide evidence with metrics, with other types of measures that learning is occurring wherever the student is. So that's the what, but moving into the how. So let's say you've gotten to a point where you determined what you want to create, you know that you want to do it, you committed. The how probably starts with some collaboration. So Jerry, I went to the website that you provided, and I see there that IUPUI's Institute
Did Amelia freeze or did I freeze? I see people nodding.
I would
So
say Amelia froze. Do you know where she
okay.
was going with this, Jerry, or do you need me to?
Yeah, I
Okay.
do. I think I know what she was going to ask.
Okay.
In terms of this collaboration piece, it's a hot mess. I'll be honest, it's not easy. I see Pam laughing, but there's some experiences that are relatively easy to track. So like study abroad, we know where that's happening. Undergraduate research for experiences that are funded through the Institute for Engaged Learning, we fund 300 students to do research with through a mentored experience with a faculty member every year. Same thing with service learning and civic engagement. We provide some funding to support students to do service learning and civic engagement work, internships, some of this stuff where there's funding involved, it's pretty easy to track, or where students are paying a couple $1,000s to do a study abroad experience, we can capture that. The hard part is the curricular stuff and some of the co-curricular as well, but I've already talked about how some of our folks here at IUPUI have been very strategic in getting their co-curricular experiences on the record for all the right reasons. But the curricular one's been a real challenge for us because there's lots of great stuff happening in our classes, and getting faculty to complete an application and then enter students into the record has been a real challenge. And so what we're really trying to do is, one, we know that high impact practices, in order to get equity, in order to get equitable access to them, you need to scale. And the one way to scale is to build them into the curriculum. We already have them happening here to a certain extent. So what we're really working to do right now is try and identify where these experiences are and encourage faculty to get these experiences on the record. And I'll put one effort we launched a couple weeks ago in the chat. We've called it our project-based learning lab, where we invited faculty to apply to be part of this lab. And what they're doing is basically going to commit themselves for the next 2 years to looking at the best practices of project-based learning. Many of them are already doing it to an extent, and basically reflect on how they teach, embed some of the best aspects of project-based learning. But part of their fellowship is getting the classes that they teach on the record and committing to doing the record. We're doing the same thing in our capstone experiences, and we're doing it in our first year seminars as well. We're trying to get these curricular experiences on the record as much as we possibly can. So it is a lot of collaboration. It's a lot of networking. It's a lot of that PRAC subcommittee that reviews these applications. They try and help us identify where these experiences are, encourage their colleagues to apply for them. It's not easy, but I use the expression a slog. It's a slog. It's just trying to get one experience at a time, because we're really, putting our flag in quality. We really want to make sure we're capturing these quality experiences.
There's a follow-up question that came up in the chat before we jump to someone else. How are you getting or encouraging faculty to actually submit the experience? Sometimes the process becomes too much for them.
Yeah, so there's shame, there's cajoling, there's begging. But this project-based learning lab that I plugged into the chat, for all of those faculty members, we're either here in the Institute buying a month of their summer salary or buying one class out. And the purpose of the lab is for them to think about project-based learning and do it to the best they possibly can within their classes. But the little carrot or stick, whatever you want to refer to it as, when this is done, you're not just going to have project-based learning in your class, but it's also going to be on the record as well. So, Charlotte, one of the faculty members who's part of our project-based learning lab, she teaches in the School of Business's I-Core program. That touches thousands of students over the course of a year or two. And so to get those students on the record would be amazing. I-Core is very much a high engaged learning experience for students in our School of Business. It's a common intellectual experience. So basically, I'm relying on these faculty just by buying out a summer class. By buying a month of summertime or buying out a course, to basically bring them under our auspices, I guess that's the wrong word, but really trying to, get their experiences on the record as best as we possibly can.
We'll talk about timing. My question for Pam was going to be, have you had any unanticipated challenges, maybe like your internet going out right in the middle of moderating a discussion? So first things first, Kelly, thank you for picking up where I left off. And this is also the benefit of letting people know your questions before you start. So my apologies for the disruption. Building on that, knowing that collaboration requires lots of planning and development, a lot of iterations of what you're developing. Pam, could you share any challenges, not necessarily things that went wrong, but things that you maybe didn't think that would take as long as it did, and the types of collaboration required to work through some of that stuff, and maybe some of the ways that it made it easier because you worked together with colleagues?
I appreciate Jerry's description of how challenging it all is, because it really has been challenging in many ways. And we experience some of the same things now about how to get people to work with us to put engagements into our system. And I guess the bottom line for me there would be everybody wants to help their students. So if their students show interest in this, that goes a long way toward making things happen. But I want to back up slightly and take a slightly different approach to the question about collaboration. I mean, it seems like a comprehensive learning record kind of by definition says you're going to have to collaborate about this across the whole institution. And I told you all about the origins of our project, and it was wanting to bring records of student engagement in student affairs programs up to institution level data, meaning not capturing them in fragmented processes, but bringing them all together into the university's information management system. So our core partnership for this project was student affairs leading the project. A key partner was our information technology division. And then another key partner was the provost office, because we were creating new education records. So we had to have that faculty buy-in as well. But the information technology part was key for us, because we were trying to figure out how do you even begin to organize systematically and collect information about student affairs engagement when there's nothing there for that right now. So I guess a key collaboration was realizing how to speak IT. I remember sitting in multiple meetings with IT groups, with them trying to learn to speak student affairs and us trying to learn to speak IT, till we finally managed to get it together on what it was we were trying to do and how to make it happen. But so IT is a key partner if you're talking about student education records, and I'm speaking from a student affairs perspective, obviously. But if you're wanting things to count and have credibility as learning experiences, then you need the buy-in of the faculty. So so we brought those folks into our group. If you're having official student education records, the registrar puts his name on the transcript and verifies education records. So that was a key partnership. And again, IT, of course, you need them to do everything these days. So you can't really move in any direction without that. So, and I will add this, one way that we were able to gain the support of the faculty and the provost leadership, which was, very influential in kind of helping us take a big leap forward with all this, is when our leadership wanted to be sure we were engaging all students in high impact practices. We kind of realized that high impact practices had the same data issues that student affairs had. You couldn't look into institutional data and easily find those practices. So by using our processes, we were able to improve data about that. And in that process, they were able to see more about what we do in student affairs and see the rigor, if you will, that we were building into this. So that was huge in helping build that collaboration and that support. And honestly, kind of one success builds on another. It was kind of an incremental process, I would say. But without collaboration, not going to happen. So.
Yeah. So we have the 3 C's. We've talked about capturing students' learning. We've talked about collaboration, and now we are starting our descent, about to land the plane. I want to leave a little bit of time for some closing thoughts from Kelly, as well as a couple of questions we didn't get to, but want to stop us here at the communication spot in the journey. And knowing that there are lots of different types of audiences for which the CLR will need to be explained, one of the most important audiences, I think, is students. And so I want to ask maybe one more question related to involving students specifically. And so Jeff, I want to come to you. And as we think about Stellar and the branding of it, and the Central 6 and all the things that come along with that, at some point you have to explain to students what it is, but also get their input. Is it something that they would use? What parts of it seem to be easily understood and which pieces need to be fleshed out a little bit more? What are some of the things that UCO has done to get student input? And what's next in terms of branding?
Well, the connection to students starts even before they get to our campus, in terms of the outreach, for example, because Stellar is the way we operationalize transformative learning, which is a part of our mission statement. It's at this stage, we're now 7 years into it. It's very much a part of the air we breathe here, but it's also very much a part of how we define ourselves when we reach out to potential students. So we actually introduce Stellar to students, whether it's transfer students or first-time, full-time students. We introduce them as a part of that orientation process. And I can tell you that that's especially good for parental buy-in. I can't tell you how many times we've heard from parents who attend. We have one version of our orientation in which parents can attend along with their children. We have heard from parents, they totally get it. Okay, this co-curricular engagement helps my child be better prepared for society, to get a better job and so forth. But then it's also important that faculty communicate to students. They're the main point of contact. And so ways faculty do this is in their syllabi. They also are very, very receptive to individual student outreach. Students will come to faculty to propose an outside of class Stellar tagged activity. Students can propose those, and we have a method to vet them. The faculty member, of course, is involved and signs off, and many times these are outside of class research projects similar to an undergraduate research model. Then we also have student groups. Let's say the university council, the student council, that's a Stellar tagged activity. Students on the council keep a journal. At the end of their term, they do a reflective artifact, and almost all of our student groups are Stellar tagged groups, because that's a good way to get the student involvement and the student buy-in. And then communication, we brand all over the place. If you walked on our campus right now, you would see pole banners, light pole banners with the Central 6 on them, with Stellar on them. And we pass out Stellar swag, as you can imagine, when there are student group activities and so forth. And then finally, to answer one specific thing about your question, Amelia, the next step for branding for Stellar might be unbranding, because Stellar has been adopted and adapted at other institutions now, reaching a degree in which we're very aware that the fastest way that we can help those other institutions is to help them, if you will, unbrand Stellar and to brand with what is appropriate for their culture, their mission, and so forth. And we always have done that with the existing institutions that have adopted and adapted, but we've learned our lessons, and now we've got a process to unbrand, really, as kind of the first step.
Yeah, I definitely understand that. And Pam, I want to just give you a moment to share a little bit as well about just ways that the communication with students has helped them see the value of this effort beyond graduation. It connects really closely to a point from Brett in the chat, which I'm going to come back to, and hopefully be able to land us in a place where we've closed up some of the loops on these other questions. But first, Pam, could you share anything about the communication with students at USC?
Yeah, the primary way that we are communicating with students now to help them understand what these records are and why we have created this way for them to see their own records, and how they can create different versions of an official transcript document and send that out, have the university send that out to prospective employers and so forth, is through our University Advising Center. And so the link that Kelly provided in the chat earlier is to a resource page on our University Advising Center. So we have put together information there with little video clips and kind of tried to explain what we're trying to do there, and how we intend for students to access and use those records. Students, advisors also have access to their advisees' records. And let me just throw in here that students can keep records private from their advisor if they want to. There's a mechanism for that, since we're collecting different kinds of records here. So that is the primary means. And of course, we talk about it in other venues like new student orientation and all kinds of places like that. But I would say advising is key. And Jeff's point that a lot of the peer leader groups or peer educator groups, those engagements, we call them, are recorded in our system. So those groups are good ways to get the word out, because they engage with other students. So that's been a good mechanism for us. And we just had our parents' family weekend over the weekend, and they actually came. In spite of everything, they came, and and we did some sessions on the comprehensive record there. And as was said before, parents get it. They understand that all of the co-curricular programs, events, and activities add to the cost of attendance. So having better information about what those are and how they contribute is very useful in that way.
Yeah, thank you, Pam. So I want to come to this question here from Brett, and it's a point well taken that we've spent a lot of time talking about internal discussions and how to get these things created and the collaboration necessary. Great question about, and I think, Jeff, you got to it also. How do we know that others find the comprehensive learner record valuable? We talked about the value to students. We want them to actually populate it and use it, but usually the next biggest group will probably be employers. And so, Jeff, I thank you for the notes you put in there. I also say we know that Elon University, for example, continuously engages with the employer community, either through career services or other means, and surveys them, shows them a copy of the record as it is currently laid out, and said, if you saw this, would you find it to be useful? In many cases, they'll say they didn't know, but once they do know, they do find it valuable. And so it does touch on a little question around, how does this relate to the resume or CV? Does it replace that? Does it in addition to? I think the value piece, though, is that most often when employers and others actually see the record and see how much can be included in it, very few, if any, times have I ever heard of employers saying they don't see it to be valuable. So I think there's more to do in terms of communicating the value and positioning that for whichever audiences that are there. So I want to take maybe 3 or 4 more minutes and come back to some of the questions. Jeff, one in the chat was related to prior learning assessment. Has IUPUI had any discussions about your experiential and applied learning record in the connection to prior learning assessment?
Amelia, no, we really haven't. It's really been focused on current curricular, co-curricular experiences. Just to circle back real quick I think Brett's question was really good about, how are we communicating this to employers? One thing that I'm concerned with here is that I think it's good students that are seeking out these records. When I mean like students who are engaged are seeking out documentation that they've engaged. I'm really big on this equity, or traditionally underserved student populations. Are they participating? I think a lot of them don't even know this record exists and how it can benefit them. We have a lot of work to do on the education front with students as well.
Yep, I definitely agree. I think we touched on a little of it just in terms of access to it, but even if it was accessible, would they know how to get to it and how to actually use it? So Pam, to your point about advising, I think that just being able to coach and mentor a student and show them how to leverage that record to their benefit throughout their journey would be essential. So there's another question here about listing program or course competencies on the records. If so, how do you keep a number of competencies clear and concise without having a never-ending list and have it be useful for future employers? I think I'd like to give this question to Pam, because I know that when you were creating the catalog, I imagine there were lots of different opportunities there. It's not the same as course competencies, but I think that organization and a never-ending list might be something that you all discuss.
Thanks, Amelia. I mentioned earlier in my comments that for each of our engagements that's cataloged and then recorded by the educator that engages the students, that we name the skills that students are developing. So when we first got started, however many years ago, we kind of tried to look at the universe of all the things that we believed we were helping students learn, and then tried to create a framework for that using learning outcomes from NASPA and competencies identified by NACE, and also learning outcomes that are mapped out in the AAC and U value rubrics. So our skills that we name are defined with information from those sources and probably a couple of other sources. So we have those definitions, we name those, and an important part of our process is for the educator to make sure the student is aware, knows these are the skills we believe you will develop in this program, and here's how you're doing that by engaging in these learning activities, so that the students are able to then talk about, yes, I have problem solving skills, for example, and here's how I develop those. And in our transcript document that goes out to employers, we include a transcript guide that has the definitions of the skills that are named on the transcript. So is it a perfect system? No. Do students learn things that are not named for a specific thing? I'm sure they do, but we found this way to try to be concise and get to the point without having so much information there that it becomes impossible or difficult.
Mm-hmm. And Heather, your question is a good one and a good timely question, because I think at some point when the record and all that it can be for your campus starts to improve and grow, you come back to this question about the next version of the design and how much should be included. I think I would definitely encourage you to connect with Jeff and even talk with them about the level of engagement and how that's displayed on the record. Should a student get credit for everything if they just did something for 2 hours versus doing something for 2 semesters? And so there's a lot more that could be said there. But we are out of time. And so at this point, I want to say thank you to our guests. Thank you for going on this discussion with us about how to capture students' learning, how to do it in a collaborative way, and how to communicate what you're working on and draw others in and hopefully help them to see the value of this. But Kelly, are there any closing comments, remarks, where they can stay in touch with everybody, announcements that you want to share?
Yeah, I would just echo your thanks to everyone that this was a great conversation, and it was really interesting to hear how all of you have similar problems and have attack them in different ways or have different takes on them. So thank you to everybody who's attending. Everybody who's registered, I will follow up with an email after this with a link to the recording, as well as all of the links that were shared in the chat. So don't feel like if you missed them, you've lost them. So I will make sure to do that. And also just a reminder that on October 25th, we'll have our next CLR Roundtable. So I put a link to the event site there. Otherwise, I will follow up with more details. We'll be changing over the website, so you can start to register for that one in the next couple of days. So thank you all very much for joining us today, and have a great day.